Morning, everybody. Welcome to Construction Cast. We're back again. This is the 5th anniversary of Construction Cast. So we started these little series of talks and chats, and I nicked the idea from Newscast, which is the BBC's thing. So thank you to them. And thought we'd have something called Construction Cast, and they haven't sued me yet, so hopefully we'll be all right. As I say, it's the 5th anniversary. We started in about the second week of lockdown when the great leader Boris Johnson told us all we couldn't go out and play anymore, and we thought, well, we'd best do something. And it's been running ever since. We used to do them once every week during lockdown, but we don't do that anymore because that would be crazy. So we do them once a month still. We try and get at least one every month if we can. This month is no exception, and we've got 4 brilliant speakers joining me this morning. We've got Claire Truman from Heritage Revival. So Claire's a qualified architect. She joined the RIBA's Conservation Register as Conservation Architect in 2020. She's also an affiliate member of the Institute of Historic Buildings and founded the RIBA's Berkshire Women Architects meetup in 2017. So lots of interesting experiences and knowledge from Claire. Claire Fallows, 2 Claires, so it's going to confuse everyone this morning. I'm going to keep asking the wrong person and the wrong person will answer, I'm sure. But Claire Fallows is from Charles Russell Speechless. Claire acts on major mixed use and residential, regeneration schemes, retail development, strategic land projects for a wide range of clients. She writes frequently for Estates Gazette, Planning Magazine and Property Week. She's also a member of the City of London Law Society, Planning and Environment Subcommittee. Claire is ranked as a recommended lawyer in the Legal 500, recognised as a leading individual in Chambers and Partners. So thank you very much to Claire for joining us today. We've got John Westerman of Edgar's. So Edgar's I know through Constructing Excellence, and if anybody on the call is not involved with Constructing Excellence, they're a really good, broad range of people attend those events. There's little clubs across the country. I run one in Essex, along with the team there. The Berkshire one is very active. The Cambridge one's very active as well. So there's some good things going on at Constructing Excellence. But John Westerman is a colleague of Jane, who is somebody I know through that. So Edgar's, he's a director and has significant experience in both public and private sectors, working both planning departments and local authorities in the Oxford region and in private practice. He's been instrumental in securing planning permission for a wide range of developments, particularly the master plan at the former RAF Bicester, which is a fascinating part of the world. There's all sorts going on there, including hotel, commercial force base, planning permission for a Mullin Automotive Museum. So there's all sorts of things that John's been involved with over the years. That's one of his standout projects, but there's all sorts of things that he's been involved with. So thank you to John for joining us. And finally, last but not least, huge thank you to Philippa for stepping in, because I just thought it'd be quite nice to have an alternative to the barrister's perspective, because we always like to bring in an extra lawyer or two on these things. So Philippa Jackson from 39 Essex Chambers is joining us as well this morning. She specialises in planning, environmental and energy and aviation law and all sorts of related areas. Recommended in the legal directories as a leading junior planner. I wish I'd get my... We'll edit this afterwards. She's recommended in the directories as a leading junior in planning, environmental law and aviation law, has been consistently ranked as one of the top planning juniors by Planning Magazine for many years. I love the descriptions that we get for barristers from Chambers and Legal 500 and things like that. So she's an outstanding practitioner, very bright, gets the facts and strategy quickly, and is able to think on her feet in front of judges. So thank you to Philippa for joining us this morning. Right, okay, that's enough of all of that. We've got the new planning laws coming in. There's the planning bill, and the NPPF has been updated or is being updated. Angela Rayner has promised the biggest housing boom in a century by ensuring shovels can be put in the ground more quickly and projects are freed from unnecessary bureaucracy. This is the government's words, not mine. These measures will help to deliver a building boom that will deliver a major boost to the economy worth billions of pounds and create tens of thousands more jobs. So we look forward to that. That would be good. John, could you give us a little bit of a background to the latest planning rules, who instigated them, where they came from, and a little bit of explanation? Grey belt seems to be something that's been discussed a lot. So would you like to just give us a very quick overview of what's going on?
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to be particularly quick given the number of changes over recent months. You've identified that the National Planning Policy Framework was updated in December 2024, and kind of true government style. It's generally pre-Christmas and an early Christmas present for us planning consultants. We've also had the planning and infrastructure bill and the written ministerial statement issued over the last couple of weeks. And I think it's fair to say, as we all know, that this is very much driven by the new government, and the focus very much is on growth, delivery, and speeding up the planning process, which in theory is all good things. In terms of the headlines, particularly in respect of the National Planning Policy Framework, these have been rehearsed previously, so I'm sure all will be familiar. But there's a very much a focus on the delivery of a sufficient supply of homes. So within the NPPF, there's a requirement for LPAs to revert back to the standard housing methodology, which removes the exceptional circumstances justification to allow LPAs to adjust their housing calculations. In terms of the economy, the NPPF places an emphasis on modern economic development, so labs, data centres, digital economy and decarbonisation. And then, as you've alluded to, in terms of the green belt, there are increased opportunities to undertake development within the green belt and the government. And there was lots of debate around this leading up to the election, but the government has, through the new NPPF, introduced the reference to grey belt. I think grey belt is kind of it's an interesting turn of phrase, because it certainly isn't a belt. It's parcels of land within the green belt, and within the NPPF it's defined as land which comprises brownfield land and any other land which does not strongly contribute to the specific greenbelt purposes of preventing unrestricted sprawl and the coalescence of settlements. I think the other key change in respect of greenbelt is the introduction of the golden rules that should be applied in respect of greenbelt development, and that's around delivery of affordable housing and an expectation that developments will deliver 15% above the prevailing rate of affordable homes to a maximum of 50%, improvements to national and local infrastructure, and new improved accessible green spaces. So those are the kind of key headlines from the NPPF, which is very much about promoting growth. And then we've got the planning and infrastructure bill that very much is hot off the press. And this provides largely opportunities for LPAs to support the delivery of these projects through local planning authorities being able to set planning fees locally. So rather than the national fees that we currently have, they would be set locally, provided they're capped at a recovery cost. I think the game changer here is that previously governments have explored the idea of planning fees being set locally, but haven't historically ring-fenced those fees towards the planning functions, whereas the intention is that the locally set fees will be ring-fenced towards the local authority service, and therefore provides an opportunity for them to improve service delivery. The Planning and Infrastructure Bill also talks about planning committee training and national schemes of delegation. On the face of it, again, sounds really good, although all the local planning authorities that I've worked for previously have had planning committee training in place, so that's not something new, I don't think. Although it is now a mandatory, or will be a mandatory prerequisite, and will come with a completion certificate. So all those councillors will have a nice certificate to put on their wall, a 4-year planning degree within 3 hours, I suspect. There's also talk around a national scheme of delegation, which again, on the face of it, sounds really good. But what does that mean in reality? And at the local level, would councillors still have the opportunity to call applications into committee? There are kind of a whole series of unanswered questions there. And then the bill also talks about the reintroduction of spatial development strategies, and talks about nature restoration as well, which is a government solution towards nitrate and water neutrality, which is a further responsibility for Natural England to develop through an environmental delivery plan. So those are the key changes from the bill. And then finally, we've got the written ministerial statement on statutory consultations, which again is positive. It's around supporting economic growth. It's around finding solutions rather than finding reasons to say no. There's an intention to launch a consultation in the spring, reducing the number of statutory consultees. So the current thinking is that Sport England, the Theatre Trust and the Garden Trust could potentially be removed as statutory consultees. there's an emphasis on limiting the number of statutory consultees, so only consulting where it is necessary to do so. Trying to ensure that statutory consultees provide their response within the 21-day consultation period, which would be a game changer, given certainly over the 20 years experience I've had particularly within kind of development management elements of my world, the likelihood of that happening, I really can't see. What could potentially be a game changer is that there's reference to a new performance framework being introduced for statutory consultees, so the performance being measured, but more importantly, an indication that the funding for consultees will be tackled. So to incentivise efficient and constructive engagement is kind of the headline. So all of it really positive, but very much that focus on growth, delivery, and service improvement by LPAs.
Okay, huge amounts to unpack there. I think if we had a few days, we could probably go through all that. Sadly, we only have half an hour, and I've wasted at least 5 minutes at the start by talking about everyone on the thing. So thank you very much, John. That's brilliant little overview. So let's go to Claire Truman initially. I think I've got that right. What do you think? Has there already been, or what do you think, more importantly, will be the impact on your sector, the heritage sector? Is all of this going to change anything for you at all?
Well, I think the Heritage Alliance, who are a consultee for the draft NPPF, have seen probably this as being a missed opportunity. The government haven't really leveraged the advantages of existing buildings, whether they're listed or in conservation areas, for example, in this case, to generate their reuse. This Historic England contributed to say 670,000 existing buildings could be offered through to housing in this way, and so I think Heritage have been rather overlooked for the benefits in terms of delivering for sustainable development and actioning what's on the ground. It's probably going to be considered easier to get permissions to develop existing buildings than trying to get these new ones on grey belt lands, where you're basically having to demonstrate that you have a case in the grey belt, and providing the extra 15% for the affordable housing will also be a challenge. So I think the heritage sector feels slightly overlooked. We're still maintaining the need to demonstrate that the special setting will be preserved, but it's a strongly contribution to this, so it's the benchmark's quite high in terms of the damage that could be caused potentially to heritage settings, I'm afraid.
Interesting. Okay. Sorry, I've got the post-MIPIM flu, and it's not helping me talk at all today. Claire Fallows, did you have anything to add to that at all from your perspective?
I think it's probably worth saying that there's no policy change in terms of how heritage is treated in the NPPF in the context of grey belt. It's still all about assessing what the level of harm is to heritage, to the setting of heritage assets, etc., and considering whether the public benefits outweigh that harm. So if you're looking at whether a site is grey belt, if the harm outweighs the public benefit and there's a strong reason for refusing or restricting development, then the site won't be grey belt. So the new policies don't necessarily mean a free-for-all in terms of heritage and other protected asset policies. It's all about applying those policies, looking at the balance and seeing whether there's reasons for refusal or not.
Thank you. But in terms of just staying with you, Claire, in terms of the new rules, are they likely to, do you think, lead to an increase in work for lawyers? Is there likely to be scope for ambiguity in the planning bill and the NPPF and things that might cause confusion and might lead to more work for people like you?
Well, it's always nice as a lawyer to have more work, so I'm not complaining if there is more work, but it's the kind of work that we do. I think the changes will lead to an uptake in planning applications. So there'll be more work, I think, on advice in terms of how the rules apply, how you should make sure your application is robust, and still the same advice on dealing with Section 106, sale viability, etc. So I think there will definitely be more work because of those increase in applications. And the system isn't getting any easier. So some of this will particularly help with dealing with delays and speeding things up, but it's still a complex system that you have to deal with. And in terms of your point on ambiguity, well, yes, there is always the case where you've got new law, you've got new policy, that there will be ambiguity, particularly because often policy is drafted on the basis of one context. You're looking at it particularly with a focus on new development in the green belt, but then if you apply that on different facts, then you question how the policy should be applied. And the interpretation of policy is a matter for the courts ultimately. So I think we will see cases that end up in the courts as to how the policy should be interpreted, and then how it's actually applied on the facts is for the decision maker. So yeah, overall, hopefully more work, but that's as a result of more planning applications coming through.
Good. Okay. Yeah. So positive work rather than negative. Hopefully.
Hopefully helping people get consent.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So, Philippa, what are your thoughts? Similar to Claire's, or do you have any?
Yes, I mean, I agree with Claire Fallows. I agree that where you have a raft of new policies as here and proposed legislative changes, that is inevitably going to generate additional litigation, it seems to me. We haven't seen, I don't think, policy changes of this magnitude since the original NPPF came in back in 2012, and that certainly generated a lot of litigation, despite the objective being to streamline the process and simplify the planning framework. I think in reality that was proved wrong by the litigation that followed, and some of these laws, some of these proposed changes in law and policy are complex, as Claire said, and one only has to look, for example, at the new grey belt rules, which are complex and are resulting in quite varied and inconsistent appeal decisions coming through thick and fast from the inspectorate at the moment, and it's difficult to see that won't result in additional litigation. Whether that succeeds or not is another matter. The courts are becoming increasingly astute to separate planning issues from legal issues. And I would also say that some of the aspects of the proposed reforms that are coming in the bill, for example, are likely to be controversial. I'm thinking, for example, of the proposed increased compulsory purchase powers, measures to remove hope value from development in relation to sites, powers granted to Natural England and local planning authorities, and where you've got reforms that are controversial in that respect, it seems to me you're likely to see increased litigation further down the line. But we're at a very early stage with the legislative changes, so all of this is for the future. But yes, in a nutshell, I think there is going to be more work for lawyers, in a positive way, as Claire Fallows says.
It's interesting that I hadn't realised the Hope Valley was a target. I'll have to look that up because that's around the corner from Mum and Dad's. So I'll see what's involved there. I'm sure Mum will be very excited to find out what's going on. Okay, interesting. So, John, what in terms of all these new rules and regulations and stuff, will there be flexibility in the way they're applied, do you think? And how important is it, more importantly, how important is it, and this is not, obviously wasn't designed to give you an opportunity to sell your business. However, how important is it to work with a professional planning advisor?
Yeah, I think it's really important to work with a planning consultancy and engage a planning consultant early on in the process. And I think given that the government's focus is very much around growth and delivery and speeding up the planning process, that in itself it's a massive task. And promoting growth in the context of local authorities that are currently under-resourced is a massive challenge. And whilst the bill does introduce some potential measures whereby those issues could start to be resolved, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And it's think turning around a local authority is very much like turning around an oil tanker. It's going to be a very, very slow process. And I think I'm a real advocate for work that local authorities do, because I think they get some bad press, unnecessarily so. And I think for me, it's about behaviours, and it's about working with a planning consultant that has the right behaviours to deliver the best outcome for the client, and work with the local authority in a collaborative way in order to deliver the best outcome. So I would say that our approach, in terms of the Edgar's approach, which is very much about working iteratively and collaboratively with the local authority. So the aim always been to have a policy compliant scheme with no technical objections, and where there is harm, you can clearly demonstrate that harm is outweighed by benefits. And for me, given the resources that local authorities face, it's about making it easy for them. So that's why behaviour is really important, and that you kind of banging your fist on the table isn't going to get the right outcome. It's recognising that they're under pressure, that they're under resourced, and it's making life as easy as possible for them, and making it difficult for them to find a reason to say no, giving them the answers that they need, or the information that they need, in order to reach the right conclusion and say yes. So very much you reference kind of the work that I've been doing on behalf of Bicester Motion at the former RAF Bicester site. That was a really, really challenging project. And actually getting the planning officer excited about the vision, so why it is you want to deliver this particular project and what's in it for the local authority, so they get excited about the opportunity, is always a good starting point. And then to review the baseline, so what's significant, where are the opportunities, and get them to agree to those baseline assessments that you've undertaken, because at that point they've got very little room to manoeuvre, because once they've agreed what's significant, what's important, where the opportunities are, and you can then demonstrate how those baseline assessments have informed the quantum of development, the parameter plans, the design principles. It's very difficult for them to reach an alternative conclusion. So I think it's not necessarily, I think the message from me is very much using the right consultant with the right behaviours, that recognises the pressures that local authorities are under, and actually works with them in order to make life easy for them and for them to reach the right conclusion for your client.
Are there, I mean, this is a silly question, and it's mainly because I know very little about it, but are there certain authorities that have got better resourcing than others? Is it easier to work with certain authorities, or is everybody totally unresourced and really struggling?
I think it's best. Sorry.
I was going to refer to the report that was the research that was carried out in this January, that 91% of local authorities have a high turnover of staff and are under-resourced. So that would be most.
Yeah, I think the figures speak for themselves, don't they? I would say that all local authorities are under-resourced. I think it's around the number of planners that they have. It's about the experience those planners have, and it's about the confidence that those planners have as well. The planning officer very much is, it's their role to weigh all of the competing arguments that will be presented to them through the planning process from their technical consultees, and weigh those comments against the benefits that will be delivered against the project. And I think for me, 9 times out of 10, you need to put the planning officer in the driving seat and give them the confidence in order to reach to be able to apply that balance and reach the right conclusion. So it's a bit of to some extent a coaching exercise to ensure that you take the planning officer with you, and you provide, if they don't have the skills, you provide them with the skills, you provide them with the information, you provide them with the evidence that they need in order to reach the right conclusion.
And John, just on that, it helps if you have an experienced officer, doesn't it, who, has confidence in terms of having dealt with similar situations, and has the confidence in terms of applying the planning balance. So the challenge for the government is not just attracting more people into the public sector, but also retaining them, so you keep that experience in the public sector.
Yeah, 100%.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So Claire Truman, going back to you and sort of your experience in Oxfordshire and that sort of thing. So Will there be more housing and more development in rural areas, do you think, as a result of all this? Is this going to lead to an explosion in villages becoming full of housing and data centres and freight facilities? Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, well, I think there is potential for this because in the revised NPPF there was less distinction between the merger of villages compared to towns. And I think this is the first time that they've made this distinction. So for me, the reading is that potentially villages can become closer together. So, for instance, outside of Reading, you've got a few of the villages around there. They're just growing and growing towards each other, almost like a village ring going around the town. So, yeah, I do think there's potential for this to be taken to lose some of the countryside effects, essentially.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyone else got any thoughts on that? Do you think that would be the case? John or Claire? Or...
I think, I think more consents will be granted, particularly in areas that could be classed as grey belt around villages, and also perhaps some of those smaller sites, greenfield sites, will be easier to deliver, for example, than brownfield sites elsewhere. Because one of the huge challenges that I don't think we've really tackled yet is looking at all of the challenges around developing brownfield development, building safety for higher risk building, costs, viability, etc. So I think it's inevitable that there will be change around villages where these policies apply.
And I would just add to that. Oh, sorry, Claire, I'm still speaking. I would just add to that. I do think that I agree that there's the potential for that, but I also think there has been a big missed opportunity in the new NPPF for more on town centre regeneration and actually more on brownfield redevelopment as well. So I would agree with Claire, with both Claires actually, and I think it's a pity that we haven't seen more in relation to town centre regeneration and housing in those areas to date, but we wait and see.
Toby's just dropped there's some very important people on the call today. Toby Fox has just asked a question. Is the distinction between towns and villages more important and more vague? Anyone want to go with that? Does anyone have any views on the distinction between towns and villages?
I think that's rather the point that Claire Truman's just been making, and I think I'd probably nod and say, yes, I agree with Claire on that I think there is scope for merging of villages, as it were, in a way perhaps that there isn't in respect of towns. And I think there's been quite an interesting recent appeal decision actually on this. So yes, potentially would be my view.
Oh, okay. So do you know what that? Are you able to share with us what the appeal decision is, or is it? I
can't remember off the top of my head. Planning resource. It's on planning resource, but it will have a long number after it. App something.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's
Anyone else can jump in if they know what I'm talking about, or the name of it. More importantly,
it was a very recent one, but I cannot remember the name.
No, I can't either.
We'll find out afterwards.
Sorry, we should have got the name.
Not a problem.
It's in the last few days, actually. I mean, it's really recent.
Oh, right, really recent. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, if you do find it, or if somebody else finds it, then let us know in the chat, or if not, then we'll find it afterwards and email it to everyone. But, that is interesting. There's, certainly where I live, out in sunny Essex, there's a bit of concern at the moment that Basildon will end up merging into Brentwood, and obviously the two towns, if anybody knows Basildon and Brentwood, the two towns are quite different in their demographics. So there is some concern amongst the people of Brentwood that the town of Basildon might arrive on our doorstep at some point. But that does, and that's the sort of thing that I think gets residents and things quite nervous, doesn't it? Those sorts of concerns. Right. So Claire Fallows, and a final sort of legal question. Kind of moving on a little bit, how difficult is it to challenge a planning decision once it's gone through? I guess, is this something you've come across kind of broadly as well as in context of the new rules? What's the process, and how difficult is it to challenge a planning decision?
Yeah, we do come across it. Most of our work is for developers, and some consents do get challenged along the way. It does happen, but it's not easy to do. You have to challenge a planning permission through the courts, so it's a legal process that you have to go through. You can't challenge it on the basis of the planning merits, so you can't just say, I don't like it and therefore I'm going to challenge it. You have to find a legal flaw. So, for example, it could be something that the officers or the members failed to take into account that was obviously material, or some other flaw in the process. But generally, the threshold is quite high. A lot of claims will be weeded out at an early stage. It's expensive all round. So not easy to do and not easy to achieve a successful claim. The bill has looked at speeding up the challenge process for the bigger infrastructure projects, particularly not removing the right to challenge, but taking out some of the stages so you get to a substantive hearing more quickly. But it's, again, the courts have resourcing issues too, so sometimes you can get backlogs in the courts in terms of making decisions. So yes, we do see it, but it's not straightforward. It's not an easy process to go through.
And Philippa, any additional points from you on that?
Completely agree with Claire Fallows. I would say I think it's interesting, perhaps looking at the new world we're in, the post new NPPF world, and the bill coming forwards, to sort of cast one's mind back to when the first NPPF came out, and as I said earlier, did generate a lot of litigation, and then along came a case a few years later called Hopkins Homes, which anyone who's involved in any planning will be very familiar with. But if you're more on the construction side, perhaps not so immediately at the forefront of your mind. And effectively, the Supreme Court said, well, hang on a minute, planning, the interpretation of planning policies is for the courts, but the application of these policies and all matters to do with planning judgment, unless they're irrational, are for planners, and we're not going to get involved in that sphere. And I would say we've seen since then a hardening of the court's position, and ever more cases where the courts have said this is not really a legal question, this is a planning question, and we're not going to deal with it. And very recently we had another case called Mead Realisations in the Court of Appeal, where a lot of those principles were reiterated, and the court said if you're looking at policies and they're sort of broad and open policies which allow for planning judgment, then there's a very broad discretion to planners. So it'll be interesting to see. I think there will, as I said before, be plenty of litigation around all these new rules, but it'll be interesting to see how the courts approach them, because as Claire Fallows said, it's not easy to challenge a planning decision in the courts. You've got to have a good legal point. But nonetheless, the cases do succeed, and if you've got a good legal point, you'll get through on it. So.
Right. Okay, good. So I've just pasted a little link in the chat there to the case that that Philippa was referring to there. So that's a summary of it. There's lots of things been written about it on the internet over the years. So and Toby has very kindly given a bit more clarification on his point around villages and towns, and that is interesting. So I'll read it out for you. So prevention of villages merging is no longer a reason to refuse, but prevention of towns merging is. So what's the distinction between a town and a village, I guess? And Radlett in Herts is the example that Toby's used. Used to insist that it was a village to control development, but now will it become a town? That's an interesting point, because I used to live in what was they used to very much call it a village, and it was definitely not a village, just a suburb of Manchester. But have you got anything else to add on that, or have we done villages and towns to death?
Two thoughts from me. One is interesting legal question, but secondly, I think a lot of this may come down to what comes out of the wash in local plans, and how they're defined for the purposes of the spatial strategy, and I think that might help.
Yeah, and for me, I think development in smaller villages is a good thing. It promotes sustainable development and it creates a sustainable settlement. I think more often than not, the SMEs that are involved in those smaller schemes, it's about legacy, it's about promoting local distinctiveness. So the quality of development you see in rural areas is often much better than you see from the volume house builders that are delivering strategic allocations. So I think that we shouldn't be fearful of development within rural areas. It's a good thing. It provides opportunities for the local community to thrive, for people to stay within that local community, for the elderly to perhaps downsize into smaller properties. It supports a school, it supports the shops, it supports a village pub. So it's a good thing. I think those that are perhaps concerned about development in rural areas, often you have conservation areas in play, you have landscape sensitivities in play. So kind of it's not a free-for-all. There are a whole series of key considerations that will need to be considered, but I think it's something that we should embrace rather than be fearful of, because there's lots of benefits.
Very good. Okay, that's interesting. There's no more questions come through yet, so while we just wait a few seconds until, oh, here we are, there's one. Right, so Kuros has asked, is the concept of delivering social as well as commercial value through development addressed in the new policy?
Well, it is in the definition of sustainable development. So there are 3 limbs to the definition of sustainable development, and one of them is a social limb. So you've got to have your economic sustainability, your social sustainability, as it were, and your environmental sustainability. So I think the answer is it has been, and it is. No one else disagrees with me.
And the detail of that often comes through the negotiation, because the authorities are looking at what they want to secure by conditions in 106, whether it's contributions to local employment, local facilities on site. It all comes down to whether or not the planning application is going to get through and is acceptable in the first place.
Fantastic. Okay, yeah, so I think that covers that. So yeah, brilliant. Okay, so unless any other questions come through in the next few seconds, that's pretty much it. We've done our half an hour and a bit, which is good. So we've fitted everything into the time that we had. You're all experts on planning now, so that's all good. Next month we're going to talk about, and it's already been alluded to today because you can't escape it no matter where you go or what you talk about, building safety. So Annie will be bringing in some experts on the subject of building safety next month. So do join us for that one if you can. And then I think with the next one after that, we're hoping to have a bit of a celebrity catch up with a celebrity construction lawyer. So we'll put more on that in due course. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you to all the panelists. So we're quite a big panel this morning, but I think it worked very well. So thank you all very much indeed for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.